So I'm going to start by creating a bone system so that we can actually articulate the hand itself. So I want to go make sure that I'm in my animation tab here, so I can press F2 on my keyboard, and I'm going to go to the skeleton. When I go to the skeleton here, I want to click on the join option box and just take a look at my setups here. We have some different options. The most important is make sure you don't create IK handles or auto joint limits, just to make sure that you can create them accordingly. I'm going to take a look at my bone radius in a little bit, but to get started, I want to create my bones in one of my orthographic views, so it's like top, side, whatever. And with my hand, like this here, where it's not exactly centered and has some rotation on it, is the bone placement is going to be difficult, to say the least. And there's a number of ways that we can do this, and I'm just going to rotate my hand into sort of an awkward position, in that awkward in the fact that you might actually see this position, or you might have your character rigged in a similar position. So how do you compensate for the bones if your hand is in this position? I'm just going to freeze transformation on this to make sure everything's zeroed out. So there's my hand position. So I'm going to start out by going to the top view. When we place bones, we have to be very careful. We don't want to adjust rotations on bones once we start placing them. So I'm going to go into my top view. It actually jump to the side, yeah. Basically what I'm looking for is the best angle so that I don't have to move the joints or the placement of the joints too much. So this actual side view instead of the top view is a lot better. So I'm going to go to my joint tool, and what I want to do is create joints that are going to run down my finger. So I have my knuckle, 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 and then tip, and return. And I'm just repeating this process. And as far as the thumb goes, it's going to be a little more difficult, but and then I'm going to just create one joint here, which everything's going to be parented to. So before I parent these, though, I'll jump to my front view. And this is where I can move and translate my bones. Again, like I mentioned before, is that we don't want to actually rotate any of the bones, we just want to move them. So I'm going to press 4 on my keyboard so that I can see my wireframe. So once I have my bone, or my bone starting to be in position, just going to move them all. The most important thing is just realizing the placement of them, because it is tricky. And again, is that you might be tempted to just be like, alright, I'll just rotate this. We don't want to have any rotations on these bones. So I'm just moving this into position, then I'll just move this tip into position. So now I have the bones placed, and they should be pretty lined up with the fingertips. The concern that we have to worry about, though, is the actual articulation of the fingers. So I'm just going to actually parent these up. And what I mean by articulation is how the fingers are going to curl. So when I go to my rotation and just use one axis, is that how does it curl down? So to do this, what we're going to set up are a series of set-driven keys. With set-driven keys, we typically want to have our mesh skinned first, so that we get better control over this. But I'm just going to start out by setting some set-driven keys so that we can sort of get the idea of the process. So I'm just going to throw my mesh on a layer and just turn it off. And the way the set-driven keys work is that as we move something else is going to move. So instead of having to select individual bones like we do now, I'm going to create a controller. So I go to Create tab, go to NURBS primitives, go to Circle. And I'll just scale this up. So I'm just going to call it hand control, and I'll do my freeze transformation and delete by type history. So this zeroes it out. And what I need to do is set up some attributes. So I'm going to click on the Add Attribute, and I have some different options for my Add Attribute. I'm going to just set a float value for my data type. Attribute type is going to be a scalar. And then I can set my numerical attribute properties with a minimum and maximum value. So the long name, and what that is just the name that you're going to be able to see to call up that attribute. I'll just call pinky curl. And with the pinky curl I'm going to just do it in the Z. Curl forward. So I'm just calling it pinky curl forward so that it indicates that we're going to be going forward here. Set my minimum value. Default location. Alright, so I'm going to just use pinky curl here, set it to keyable, set the value to float so it's a decimal value, scalar, and I'm going to set my minimum value here to -10, my maximum value to, say, 20, and my default value to 0. What that's for is so that my default value is the initial position, and then I can set my min-max range. And I'll just hit OK. So this is just going to be one control for the pinky itself, and I'm not going to worry about the other attributes just yet. So how this works is that we want to select our joint, and we're going to go to Animate, click on Set Driven Keys and click on Set. When we click on this, we get our Set Driven Key option box or window here. And what we want to do is, what is our driver? What is driving our bone? Well, the controller is. So I'm going to click on that, and we have our hand controller here, and I have my attribute pinky curl. What is going to be driven, right? The driven object is going to be this bone. So I'm going to click on load driver, or load driven, and now for this joint, since I haven't named it or anything, I need to figure out what rotation axis this is going to be. So I can click on my rotation, and it looks like rotate Z is the right axis. So going back is that my pinky curl right now is set to 0, and then going to my joint axis, I'm going to hit key. So now 0 should associate with the rotate Z at 0. Now I'm going to go back to my hand control, and I'm going to set my pinky curl to -10, and then go into my joint, and rotate this. And I'm just flexing this back. And I'll key that. Then I'll go back to my pinky curl, set this to 20, click on my joint, and move this forward. And I'll just set this to -90 right now, and key that. So now to test this out, I'm just going to close my Set Driven Key window, set my pinky curl to 0, and that should put me back to my initial position. And if I click on pinky curl and use my middle mouse button, I can do this wiggle here. That's only moving the finger in the Z direction. So it's right now it's pretty linear. And this is where I can just go in and add in another attribute. So I want to call it pinky knuckle. And I mean, typically we can't move our fingers back or our knuckles back, so it's going to be basically 0. Set the max to 20 and default to 0. And I'm just going to hit add, and then I'm going to do pinky tip. And I'll set this to -5 as the minimum. Set this to 20 and default at 0 also, and hit OK. So now I have some more attributes to work on, and just going through the process again, I can open up my Set Driven Key window, load my driver, which is my controller, then I'm going to go to my knuckle. I want to make sure that I actually have my knuckle selected, and make sure that that's going to be my load driven. It should be rotate Z also again, so I should be able to select that, and then just hit key. Now I can go back to my attribute for my pinky knuckle, set this to -10 or -5, which I didn't actually set any attribute because this bone doesn't flex. And now I'm going to go to this to 20 for my pinky knuckle. Go to my joint, and I want to increase that value to 90, or -90. and then key that. Then I just need to do my last attribute. So I'm going to just load drive, select my controller, load driver, select the pinky tip. My bone is already selected, but I want to move on to the next set of bones. So I'm going to click on that, click on load driven, and just make sure that I'm on the right rotation. And when we look at this bone here, is that rotate Z is something completely different. It's actually rotate Y that I want for this bone. And this is where you have to pay special attention to the way that the bones are. There was an orientation issue for whatever reason when I created that chain that caused my rotation to be different. So I'm going to, with my pinky tip, key this, go back to my pinky tip, set this to -5, and then go to my rotate Y. And just give this a little flex, and it's just going to be 15. So I'll key, and then come back to my pinky tip, and set that to 90, and key that. So now I can set all my values to 0, and I get them back to my initial position. But I can use my sliders to be able to flex the fingers back as well as do a curl. And we'll notice that it curls a little awkwardly, and that's something that we will address with more of our wiggle. Because when you look at the finger, is that realistically only this bone should move. So I'm going to just go in here, add an attribute, pinky wiggle, and we'll just set it to -10, 10, and set the value to 0, and pinky twist. -30, +30 and 0. And I mean, you're seeing me go through this process, and I have to do this process for every finger. With set driven keys is that I don't have the ability to just copy all the attributes over, or at least not easily. So I'm going to go to wiggle, and drive the bone, and for my wiggle it's going to be Y rotation, wiggle, Y rotation, and I want to key that. And I'm going to go back to my hand control. Set my wiggle to the right. twist is going to be 0. Which I'm going to do will rotate X now. And I want to make sure that that's zeroed out also. And key that. And come back up to my pinky twist, and I'll set this to -30. Set this to 30. And as I'm adjusting these values here, it's gonna be dramatic, but it will allow me to get the effect that I need. And key that. Set this to +30. This to -30 and key that. So now my controls for the pinky are set where I can just zero them out, and I should end up back at my initial position. But at any point I can just go in and do a twist, like so. I can wiggle back and forth, and then I can curl. So with the twist and wiggle, I can get my fingers into position. And, I mean, that's really the power of set-driven keys, is that I can use this technique to do all my bones, and rather than having to manually rotate each bone and set the keys for that, is I have these controls to get my articulation down. So now that I have the set-driven keys set up, or at least for one bone, I'm going to select my model, or turn my visibility back on my model, and actually select my model. What I want to do is I'm going to actually skin this up where I have the bone selected, and then I also have the skin selected. I'm going to go to my hierarchy, or my outliner I should say, and open up the joints. And normally I want to actually name my joints, get in the habit of naming them just so that it's easier to work with. Let's call this thumb. Thumb knuckle. And I can just go through and do all the joints. And basically what I'm doing here, or what I want to do, is I'm going to select everything except for the last joints on the chain. And this is important when you are actually skinning a character, or skinning anything, is that the tip joints here don't have any influence on the model. Alright, so there's nothing that I need that should affect them. So I'm just going to not select them so that they don't calculate. And then I'm going to select the model itself, and go up to Skin, Bind Skin, and I'm going to go to the Smooth Bind option box. And I have some options here where it says Bind to Joint Hierarchy, Selected Joints, or Object Hierarchy. I want to do Selected Joints, and that's so that it's only going to bind the selected joints and not actually the nubs or the tips of the fingers, which I don't want. Then I have my bind method with closest in hierarchy or closest distance. I'm going to do closest in hierarchy over closest distance just because I have the webbing in the hands, which could be a problem. And then we have some skinning methods, and I'm just going to keep it to classic linear because I know that will work. As far as max influence, I'm going to lower this down to 3, and the reason is we don't have many bones in our setup, so we don't have to do that. Some people really like to have colorized bones, so make sure you have that checked on. And allow multiple bind poses is essential depending on the type of rig that you're going to have. So I'm going to just do my bind skin now. And I could go into all my bones, but I don't have to. I already have a rig set up, so I can go into my pinky knuckle here and sort of get an idea of how my finger is actually working. And this is where the wiggle can come in. So depending on how it looks, I can wiggle it, or I can twist it so it doesn't look as deformed as it can. And, I mean, this is where there's some fine-tuning to this, because we can see that the twist is a little off. And if you see anything that looks awkward like this, where it's bent, you might have to adjust the orientation on the bones beforehand. I do have some penetration going on with the curl, because the curl value is a little too high. So just telling me that I shouldn't curl more than this, otherwise it starts pinching. So then I just have to control the other joints to get down there. When we do use joints in extreme poses, and what I mean by extreme is we're starting to get to that point of 90 degrees, depending on how the topology is set, is crucial, because we can basically collapse our model in on itself, and it won't render correctly, or it will flicker. So I have some conflicts right there. So just pulling it out a little bit.